about emotion of nationalism. But before we proceed, we'd like to introduce a wonderful list of judges that are going to be this year's panelists and determine who is going to be the champion of this year's NOVED. First up, our first judge is the incredible Anisya Alistasya from Universitas Mataram. Yay! She was the CAP of Katamie and UDC Region 4 for 2023, Open Grand Final Judge of Katamie and UDC, as well as an Open Champion of NUDC 2021, EFL pre-quarter finalist and Open quarter finalist for ABP and JOFET. Next, we have Gracia Prasetyanti Utami, Grace from Saratalerna. Yay! Second best speaker and runner-up of ERI 2023, top 10 best speaker and second runner-up of Depot, overall best speaker and quarterfinals of Code, and internal adjudicators of many competitions, all high level, very good judge. Next, we have Katamie from UNPAD. Woo! The co-best in-depth judge and 7th overall best judge for NOVED 2021. Best in-depth judge of Australs 2021, first runner-up and 5th best speaker of ALSA, champion and 9th best speaker of ERI, as well as the Open Grand Finalist and co-10th best speaker of HF 2021. Next, we have Chris from Sadar. Yay! The best in-depth judge and 3rd overall best judge for IFET, champion overall best speaker of LOFCOM 2021 and 2022, first runner-up of ERI, bronze medalist of NUDC, and the ESL semifinalist of Uhuru Worlds 2022. Next, we have Marvin from ITB. Very good credentials with ESL semifinalist for UDJ 2021-2023, EFL grand finalist of ABP, and champion and top 5 best speakers of NUDC. Next, we have Yuwanto from Undip with open quarterfinalist and bronze medalist of NUDC, invited adjudicator of LDBI, breaking judge of IPK, pre-semifinalist of JDF, as well as the run-up of Airport 2022. And of course, to chair this incredible round needs an incredible judge as well. Beauty Ariel from Unikat Majaya, CAP of NOVED, ALSA and Atma Open, invited and breaking judge of many competitions, open break and 4th EFL speaker of ABP, EFL semifinalist of Belgrade, ABP, and Australs, as well as the EFL champion, Grand Finals best speaker, and 3rd best EFL speaker of Australs 2022. She is ready to lead the delegation, the deliberations of all the panels to ensure a wonderful judging for this round. Over to you, Ariel.
Thank you, Algard, for the warm introductions. As we still have 1 more minute towards the case will end, I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce the 4 great teams that will be debating within NOVED 2023's Open Grand Final. Albeit, by now, everyone who are debating or taking part in this will already know NOVED is one of the biggest and the classic BP tournament of Indonesia. So we are very proud to have we are very proud of everyone here, and we know it wasn't a huge feat. We know that it's a huge feat for being able to reach here. So here's the matchup, and here are the teams that will be debating in NOVED 2023's Open Grand Final. In opening government, representing UGM, it is UGME with Jason Valentino and Brian Jose. In opening opposition, representing UI, is UIB, Raynathan and Justin Gabriel. In closing government is UID, which is Sutra Setiara and Mayta Ciara. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And last but definitely not least, in closing opposition, we have UNAIR, represented by Kevin Kesuma and Prashanti Lakshita. As the on time, as the case building time is up, calling the house to order. Opening government, are you here and complete?
Yep, you're here and complete.
Okay, opening opposition, are you here and complete?
Complete.
Cool. Closing government, are you here and complete?
Complete.
Okay, closing opposition, are you here and complete?
Yep.
Cool. Making sure all the judges are here. Each are you here?
Here.
Okay, Grace, are you here?
Here.
Okay, Katamie, are you here?
Here.
Okay, Curse, are you here?
Selamat hari Minggu, salam sejahtera, Tuhan Yesus memberkati.
Tuhan Yesus memberkati kembali. Marvin, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Yuwanto, are you here?
Here.
And I'm definitely here, so let's start the round for today. Several house rules just to make sure everything is well. I'll try my best to keep timestamps in the chat. However, it is not going to be something I prioritize, so everyone should time their own speeches and time each other's speeches as well. Please engage in POI. Let's make this a very high-quality grand finals filled with engagements from POI. So keep timings of your opponent's POIs to give the right to POI during the unprotected time. Make sure that you also maintain equity. Make sure that this, debate is able to be kept within the platforms so that can be used for references in the future. So yeah, without further ado, under the wonderful motion, this house celebrates the decreasing popularity of nationalism. We call the Prime Minister to begin NOVED 2023's Open Grand Final. Here, here.
Right. Hello. Am I audible?
Yep, you're audible and visible.
Okay. First of all, selamat hari Minggu, Tuhan Yesus memberkati. And yeah, this is my first grand final appearance in classics, so I hope you all be forgiving for me to get a little sentimental. So yeah, I would like to thank the coaches and the partners of EDSUGM who has coached us for a few weeks. To our fellow NOVED fighters, we will fight this for all of you. To HRD staff, especially Safa, thank you for organizing all this. And yeah, to everybody who has been supporting, we thank you. And last but not least, obviously, to my partner, Jose, who has been carrying my ass throughout this tournament. I am thankful for you. And yeah, I couldn't be here without your care. Anyway, this PS, this speech is also sponsored by EduTechnica. Right. POI, just unmute yourself. Prioritizing CO. And I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. JFK did said, ask not what your country can do for you as what you can do to your country. But in the end, the people has done far too many for the countries justified to begin with. The country barely do anything other than corruption and abuse of power, while the citizen cannot keep the country in check exactly because it is not nationalistic. We are celebrating the decline of nationalism exactly because of this. 2 points of setup. Firstly, what does it mean to celebrate? It means like it's already happening in status quo. The decline is already happening. The manifestation is that you have less loyalty to the nation. You are more open to criticize your own state for past behaviors. And secondly, nationalism is the form of a loyalty to the nation, the extreme version of patriotism. This looks like you are encouraging yourself to sacrifice for the country. You are encouraging xenophobia so that your country feels superior and chauvinism. 1 point of case, why nationalism has always brought net harm. How is nationalism framed in the in previous yesteryear, for example? It is framed as a basic duty of the citizen to be contributive to the state, and the communal duty is outweighing your personal duties, and sacrificing for country is bare minimum. While supremacy of the nation is important because you have to create a counterfactual where other country is far worse than your own country, meaning that your personality doesn't matter. This is important because ultimately this form of nationalism usually follows the majority standard. For example, in the US, for example, where it follow the white standard or the nationalism in Indonesia, where usually it followed the Jawa standard. This narrative exists as a tool of social control. It is implemented since you are a school through studies like civic studies, like PKN or whatnot. You are de facto being brainwashed by the state to love your country, whatever the cost may be. And you are blaming others, blaming those who criticize the government for being not nationalistic. The reason we are not criticizing Indonesian government right now for the treatment of the people in Papua, for example, is exactly because it is not nationalistic. And it is the tool for state to maintain the state power by increasing the control of the state, keeping the state as the priority, and the critic of the government is equated to critic of the state, which is unnationalistic and should be scorned upon. This is likely to happen because state obviously want to stay in power, while they have so much power in the eyes of the society, in the eyes of the world, that ultimately it corrupts them because no check and balances can be done effectively, exactly because of the backlash in the society, because of it is being seen as unnationalistic. By controlling the state, having the control power of the narrative, they are controlling the truth. The state is so powerful that they are able to control the media, the education, and whatnot. Hence, they are seeing that patriotism, that nationalism is the only objective truth, and there is no other way for you to act as a citizen. How does this interact with people's mindset later? You are being constantly exposed to this idea from your SD years. Even in your college years, you are still receiving the education like PKN. You are tending to believe that. You're tending to be nationalistic and believing in the state cause. And even if you don't, the peer pressure will be so overwhelming because you are surrounded by the people who are believing in this idea, who are brainwashed by the government, meaning that most likely, exactly because you are afraid by the societal judgment, you are most likely stay in the line. And even if there is no societal judgment, you are still afraid of it because you just want to go along with the in-group. You are fearing that you are sacrificing your own personal well-being by not being nationalistic, by being scorned upon by the society. The manifestation is the blind nationalism that tends to happen. This is bad because they continuously input values to the mind. You are able to control the society. You are belittling other nations by saying that they are not as special as others, as your own countries. Therefore, it is easier for government to implement policies such as going to war unjustifiably. This is important because in the face of, for example, implementing the policy or going to war, the hardest part of any state must do is selling the war itself to the society. The United States took 2 years for selling the feasibility of the war in Iraq for 2 years. And with this nationalism, it makes their job easier to be done by scorning others for not being nationalistic, for scorning the critic for not being nationalistic, and therefore it is going to be much easier and much simpler for the state to go on a rash policy. Before I go on to the counterfactual, any point from CG? CO?
Yeah, exactly. I do think that nationalism works when an individual sees there is practical benefit from having a national identity, right? All your characterization on what nationalism looks like makes the individual not incentivized to become nationalist. It means that your characterization of the regret is inaccurate with what status quo or with the debate will probably look like later.
One, nationalism is the more extreme version of patriotism. You can still have national identity in yourself. You can still be proud of your state. You just don't have to sacrifice your personal needs to the state in and of itself. So therefore, their point is irrelevant. The counterfactual is that the citizens not believing in the state interest, in the state nationalism through the rise of social media and globalization. Therefore, they are going to be more skeptic. This is important because the more powerful the state is, the more check and balance is needed. And it is only exclusive in our side because you don't need to follow the herd mentality. The nationalism will not get weaponized by the state by using the narrative such as the critics are the traitors, for example. And even if this is not exclusive, it will be done more effectively on our side, because it will increase the scrutiny to the state, to the government. This is likely because of the skepticism is becoming the norm in status quo, and government will have the incentive to be more careful in making decisions, not making rash decisions, such as going to war to other countries by belittling them. The weighing is that the decline should be celebrated, because gone are the days where blind nationalism used as the state control tool and public will not act as a herd, but as a rational and skeptic people proud to propose.
We thank the Prime Minister. To start the opposition side of the House, we call upon the Leader of the Opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, test. Am I audible?
Yep,
Test.
you're audible.
All right, cool. Okay. Gender pronounce your day. POI, please unmute yourself. I will not be reading through the chat. Yep, this is my first class explain final. I hope that this is going to be a great debate. Radical ultranationalist groups exist in both cases. The problem is that decreasing nationalism impacts the gray area people, not the radical groups. And exactly then, the decreasing nationalism would remove the check and balance for these radical ultranationalist groups that OG tries to propose. This is why nationalism is important under 2 points of models. Number one, we think that decreasing nationalism impacts the majority of people, meaning that we think that radical nationalist groups, they are very ideological centered, they will still exist, but the majority of people would feel apathy to politics. The majority of people would feel distrust their nation, and therefore, like, they would most likely believe no longer have attachment to their nation. Second point of model is that humans are inherently social beings. Therefore, the counterfactual government side of the House has to defend is that people would associate themselves with their identity, like with race, religion, ethnicity. Exactly on the other side of the House, then politics is going to be very much identitarian based, creates a segmented society on the other side of the House. This is an evaluative debate, meaning that government does not only have to prove to you why nationalism, decreasing nationalism is bad, is good, but they need also to argue the counter alternative that's going to happen on the other side of the House. Government has to take it further. Two things in my speech. Firstly, why decreasing popularity of nationalism is bad, but secondly, why that nationalism is important and therefore it has to be upheld. First, why decreasing popularity of nationalism is bad. I have 6 points here. Firstly, within that decreasing nationalism means that government has failed people. Like, for instance, under the House, then, for instance, like, government did not really protect the people, did not really serve the interests of people. Like, for instance, there are lots of, legislations being passed that are not pro to the people. And there's also, like, institutions like KPK that they are being weakened and whatnot, right? Meaning that under the House, the moment they celebrate the decreasing popularity of nationalism, they support the government's failure to begin with. They support government's oppression to people under the House. Exactly, we question then what kind of government that they're going to support on this side of the House, right? But second of all, within that, supporting this decrease of nationalism means that it backlashes the efforts and the sacrifice of elders. Because notice that countless millions of lives have fought for the independence of the country, like Indonesia, for instance, right? And there's the House, it's the moment they fight for the country, that means that they want their country to persist in the long run, right? At the other side of the House, the moment they support decrease of nationalism, meaning that they support the unfairness of these individuals, for them to turn back on the elderly to begin with under the House, right? Meaning that they prefer that these individuals, the society at large, no longer care about what happens to their country, the future of the country. We think that already is in itself a morally bad thing. Third point, we did that on the other side of the House exactly is what incentivizes political campaigns that are very much relying on identity. Because on the other side of the House, then exactly politicians will try to tap into these people because they know that these people no longer believe in nationalism. They will try to tap into their race, their religion, and whatnot, right? This is important because why? Because under the other side of the House, then politics will be very shallow because notice that identity work in association and not merit-based. The harm is twofold. Number one, that under the other side of the House, then politicians will no longer have the incentive to create campaigns that are effective, campaigns that are about effective programs, about what happens to economic redistribution, about environment protection and whatnot. There's the house, the campaigns were most likely just target into, like, oh, you are a majority religion and therefore you have to vote for me. And there's the house, and this political discourse is going to be very much segmented into different identities and different races to begin with, right? But second of all, even after they get elected, there's less incentive for the people to, give accountability to them. Because why? Because they don't even know what happens to these politicians. They don't know the programs, and therefore there's the house that Indonesian politics are basically politics in general would most likely to, like, no longer have that sense of, urgency for them to create better programs in this other house, because they just need to cater to, like, the identity of the groups that they're trying to get the votes rate. To get to the votes. Fourth point is that state operates in social contract. Exactly under this of the house, there's the rise of radical ultranationalist and religious groups, and exactly then people will no longer trust in the government, and therefore people would resort into these radical religious groups, that the right-wing Islamist groups, for instance, that persecute the most vulnerable people, persecute LGBT communities, persecute women, persecute people who actually live together in the same house, for instance. Exactly, there's the house with people would resort this because they decrease the nationalism under this of the house, right? But fifthly, this also affects individual decision-making process, because we think that element of nationalism is equality. We think that, for instance, the reason why foreign nation can survive is that for people, everyone to have the same economic power, for instance, right? Exactly why nationalism protects, for instance, protects domestic industries or protects the poor people, etc. Right? And there's the house. This affects people, everyday people. Why should I care about people? Why should I pay taxes? Why should I vote for the government? And there's the house. This creates more self-centered people that don't care about people who actually need this the most. This is very important because people who are, very much vulnerable actually need these kind of people to support in terms of paying taxes, in terms of, going to the booth and vote for them, for the politicians and whatnot, right? But lastly, sixth point is that under this of the house, they allows westernization because it's easier for Western country to impose their quote-unquote national standards. It's justified under this of the house for them to, like, tap into these countries and set this model, like, oh, you have to believe in this, and exactly this allows this allows more colonization happen under this of the house. This is important. Two reasons. One, this is the prerequisite for whatever benefit the closing batch is going to take. Because something that after the house, we prove to you why then this is government failure to begin with, and why then we provide to you the counterfactual that's going to happen under government batch, right? But second of all, this is important because this directly clashes the most vulnerable people. We think that we told you how then this would affect not only everyday people to be more self-centered, but also explain how politicians are going to work in a very identity-based and therefore ignores the vulnerable community. But before moving to my second argument, is there any PI? 3, 2, 1. No engagement. Why nationalism is important? 4 points. Number one, we know that only privileged people are able to benefit from this decrease in popularity because only the most, only middle to upper economic class are able to decrease their nationalism. But vulnerable people rely on the nationalism of the entire country because this nationalism drives demonstration. This nationalism drives social discourse and whatnot. These poor people need the nationalism for them to, carry this issue, carry the RUU KUHP, carry the omnibus law, carry the RUU PKS and whatnot to actually brought to the legislative, for instance. And if there's not the house, then only privileged people, are able to benefit. The vulnerable people are going to suffer from this decrease of nationalism, right? But second of all, we think that nationalism helps unite people from different backgrounds. The process is simple because we think that understand how people would see that they are no longer, segmented into different identity. Yes, identity exists in both sides of the house. Yes, of course, gender and race still exist. But on the other side of the house, they see that, at the end of the day, we're still in the same country. We're still in the same nationality. And notice that under the outside of the house, when they have, on the outside of the house, when the decrease of nationalism exists, exactly then they would no longer feel like, I have one country or whatnot, right? Therefore, nationalism helps the people to unite and to be able to relate to, different identity because at least we're in the same, we live in the same country or we belong in the same, we have the same blood, for instance, right? But thirdly, within that nationalism keeps government accountable because nationalism means that you have pride of something bigger than themselves, and this will incentivize people to treasure and maintain that pride of the country. This is likely because of 2 reasons. Number one, because there's a social discourse that creates awareness that this would push people to, talk about it, talk about the country, talk about, our country is good, but there's a progress that we need to exist, that there's a progress that we need to uphold. But secondly, there's also collective action, which is this collective action like demonstration and help donation to the marginalized people, like the poor people and whatnot. For all these reasons, therefore, we believe that nationalism should be upheld, opposed.
We thank the leader of opposition for that speech. To continue, we call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Here. DPM.
Hi, just checking, am I both audible and visible?
Yep, you're both audible and visible.
All right. Thank you for the confirmations. I'm going to correct a little bit. Yeah, for the PI student meeting, might take one from closing. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I would note that the idea of nationalism is existing to provide unity, but in exchange of alienating the others and trying to finding the enemy by being more extremely populist. You saw this in a lot of historical precedents. In terms of Indonesia, you need to be united with the existence of alienating the others, such as people in rural area like Papua, who did not contribute much pre-independency. This means that the nationalism is tied to things such as identity, like what Jason explained. In their side, LO cannot just claim that on ours it will be identity-based. Because in contrast to measure which community is better under the valorization of values, people are likely to choose based on the idea of meritocracy, which one that could give them more pragmatic benefit by measuring the rational programs, for instance. And all of this is likely absent nationalism. The idea of ideological filter would be non-existence, flip their claim. So if their case is persecuting the others, especially minority, we open up for more chances of discussion absent nationalism. So their comparative is worse if they want to win for minority. I'm going to talk about 3 things. First, social validation. Second, counterfactual. Third, lastly, macro impact. Firstly then, let's talk about social validations. The first thing that I'll do is engaging on the sub-issue of humanitarian and unity in Upbench. Why they cannot simply achieve this in their side? Because the projection of nationalism is still on the basis of certain standard. Predominantly, it would be under the valorizations of the majority values and majority figures. This looks like the winner of war takes all, such as Sukarno, who still valorized up until now as a figure. Proof why most likely it would be majoritarian because they hold much power as a result of bigger contribution in things such as post-independency. The problem is the post-independency oftentimes cause a lot of intergenerational demonization of minority groups such as PKI, such as people in Timor-Leste or in Papua, for instance, who constantly rebel against Indonesian government as a result of constant conflict because of this abandonment. This means 3 things why we should celebrate this. 1, with the nationalism, people are unlikely to feel equal. Because in order for you to grow superiority and massive trust in between the nation, you need to uplifting every single thing about it and become extremely fanatic or chauvinistic in terms of discrimination, in terms of considering your community and race as superior by the narrative such as white supremacists. This means the idea of decreasing nationalism should be celebrated because of the historical precedents that caught minority in discrimination. But secondly, this is an a priori contribution because the trauma that minority feel as a result of nationalism around 1998 and even previously is not just mental breakdown. When Chinese were brutally murdered, raped by the Indonesian who claimed themselves as nationalistic, this means that by celebrating this with a lot of discussion in social media to counterbalance the misinformation that exists and historical content that was being twisted by government, when people are generally aware that government is not that perfect, people are likely to give them validation to them as a result of them being sympathetic as what LO claimed, as a result of them feeling guilty and feeling that government has persecuted them unfairly. That is why people are treating Chinese nowadays in Indonesia in a good and friendly way, in contrast to 2 decades ago when a lot of people are being massively violent as a result of nationalism. This matter because government, when they did persecution or society altogether, they might not give them any compensation because this means that they are directly admitting that they are the perpetrator of genocide, and answer why validation is exclusive from the decline of nationalism. On our side, we prove why the support, the validation that they get as a result of alienation is exclusive. We will tell them that you are not capable of being minority. We will tell them that you have society right now as a backup if government did say the same mistake that ensure them security and safe space. At best, even coerce government to give them proper compensation as a result of Pasin's regime. This is why we are significantly better in terms of validating the minority on our side of house in contrast to opening opposition. But secondly then, let's talk about counterfactual. Because they did not properly engage with this premise. Absent nationalism, what are the most likely counterfactual to appear? Jason explained that it would be the narrative of progressive mindset. Why? Absent nationalism, the discussion on the status quo is massively growing in terms of things such as the idea of egalitarian to bring equality. Because we believe there is no entity who become even superior than the others. There is no one who doctrinate them and control media to degrade some communities on individuals. This means in the status quo, when there is no nationalism, no one will be a barrier to future progress of equality. Under our side, one, people are likely to access more democratic mindset with equal representatives, because now all the agenda of social movement based on the Western idea that they claim to be bad, where we perceive them as a foreign radical value because of nationalism, will come into a specific nation. And I would posit that this is good and not bad like what I will claim. Now people and states would learn to be more progressive. And I want to note that they cannot just claim that nationalistic is good, because if it is based on identity, then people are likely to be separated in so many ways later. In terms of things such as political duty, when so many conflict happening under the basis of nationalism, in terms of social discourse, which there is always one entity to control the values, become some of the values might be perceived as not nationalistic and in the end filter the others. But on our side, it is completely different, because now when you question your state, question your Pancasila, question your values, you are likely to be more rational, because the thought process of this claim is that you are likely to be more aware and accepting the other values to be considerate full, means you are likely to make rational decision and moral compass, because you have more information available on our side in contrast to in theirs. But secondly, you are likely to accept future progress in terms of things such as technology, research, medicines, only if you believe that the other nation product is qualified, in contrast to what is happening in theirs that will help people on the ground. But thirdly, you're likely to build diversified society in terms of diversification that is happening in our side, so that people could live freely absent the nationalism and feel secure. Before that, sure, closing.
I do think that progressivity in its manifestation is something that is entirely individual. You tend to fight for issues that are inherently proximate to you. What makes you think that Jawa people will suddenly fight for Papua people now that you do not have a common national identity?
Because it's simple that it gives you pragmatic benefit. If Papua is not being conquered, then most likely the Indonesian government would be extremely exploited. Our counterfactual is meritocracy and pragmatic incentive, like what Jason explained. Just listen to his pitch. We explained that in most cases that people will still help them based on the pragmatic incentive, based on the idea of comparative advantage that they had. So yeah, basically like that. Why all of this likely to manifest? Jason explained that in most cases, political approach of things such as political identity and other recourse policies such as increasing military power without urgency would be non-existent. The mindset of skeptic people are existing, because now you might be able to convince government and decentralize the power when people are aware that we should not absolutely trust everything in our government, included internal values such as ideology and moral compass. This means that people are likely to have more power in terms of foods, awareness, and society altogether. Third issue then, let's talk about micro impact. I want to note in micro impact why this is important. In their side, the vast majority of things such as research, knowledge, economic cooperation would likely to be less manifested, because the vast majority of the progress exists based on the Western centric, because everyone believes in the nationalism that we could do this by ourselves. The problem is, one, we face a lot of things such as crisis and COVID that always makes us questioning our failures from government, so they're unlikely to make good decisions in their side. But secondly then, the appreciation from the people, the smarts, the experts, for instance, who are perceived to be the leaders of the countries in the futures are unlikely to be feel appreciated, because all the contributions that they made would be just degraded based on the basis of nationalism, based on the contributions of your country. So they are unlikely to get things such as more income, more salary, for instance, or more recognitions under their side of the house. Therefore, this proves to you why, even in the future, the vast majority of their progress would be non-existent, because in the end, they're just being persecuted by states. It's now time to speak up and propose.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. To continue, we call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yep, you're audible. Are you able to turn on your camera?
Yeah, I am. Give me a second. Okay. Wait, okay, you know what? Give me 30 seconds. I'm gonna go to the restroom.
Okay.
This is not reflective of my view, just for the purpose of the debate. Hope that's understandable. Panel 78 years ago, there was a dream to unite 17,000 islands and hundreds of ethnicities and religion under the same banner of red and white. Most will say that the dream was realized then. But the decline of the fiery spirit, the death of bravery and patriotism, and the vanishing of the drive that wants to change and everything for the better has made me question our success. Sukarno said that our struggles will be harder because we will be fighting our fellow countrymen. And the only way we can avoid this altogether is if we go back and unite under the same flag and under the same identity, because no one can do this unless we start now. I want to note one thing before going on to the issues. We don't endorse bad actions, and clearly I think some things that opening government mentioned, i.e. genocide and massive assault to Chinese Indonesians in 98, I don't think they're a form of nationalism, right? In fact, I'll flip this and I will argue that these things, hatred based on identity, is significantly worse under their side. That transitions me smoothly to my first thing. What is a likely counterfactual absent nationalism? The Hail Mary defense that Jose gave was that, we're going to go with egalitarianism and progressivity. I want to establish how important this is. In the state of nature, i.e. before the era of civilization, Thomas Hobbes labeled life to be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. People were in constant war with one another over resources that are limited and finite. It isn't until later that they started forming groups based on their identity, i.e. their similarity as opposed to differences that tend to be exclusive for people who they think do not contribute to their in-group. This is a dish house celebrates motion, trend motion. Opening government cannot pick and choose what counterfactual they want. Why is it more likely that you're going to be chauvinistic and ethnocentrism for your own ethnicity and your own identity as opposed to progressivity? 3 reasons. 1, humans essentially value similarity more than differences. Because as humans, you relate to something that looks similar to you. You relate to something that understands you. And insofar as people from similar identity understand better one another compared to people from different identity, you're more likely to relate to them, especially if you're in the majority position. Secondly, even if they're not intentional, even if they're not like intentionally evil, it's unfamiliarity because people have proximity biases. Kevin tried to POI this, but we argued this already. They cannot steal this in closing opposition. In fact, both Jason and Jose argued that by nationalism, people will hate other countries. So I think that's sort of conceded that humans have that proximity bias, right? People who are proximate to them will be protected while they band together to protect themselves against a threat that is external to them. Like, that is to say, people with a similar identity, i.e. in their side of the house, same religion, same ethnicity, same race, they're going to unite together. And absent the existence of nationalism, a common identity, they're going to resort to other similar factors that they might share to one another that we prove to be significantly harmful. But lastly, there's an opportunity cost, right? If you want to relate with people who are far from you, if you want to relate to people who are different, you always have pragmatic interest. I think Jose sort of conceded to this, right? They say, oh, you have comparative advantage. Not only that's a horrible sentiment, that is to say, if people no longer have a comparative advantage, you're not likely to protect them at all. Well, they're probably the most vulnerable individual. You're only going to value them insofar as there's a benefit. And insofar as that's true, I really don't think that that's what a state should stand for within this debate. What that proves is that the counterfactual in their side is wrong, and all the benefits that Jose spent 5 minutes on his speech doesn't matter in this debate. Secondly, what is the best way to keep the country and state accountable? We do this in 3 key mechanisms. 1, what we told you was that active participation. Insofar as you need to actually do something to make sure that the state changes or to make sure that the state continues to be good, this looks like 3 things. First, this looks like voting. You need to be a good and a reasonable citizen that is an important political capital. Make the politicians hear you, as opposed to being pessimist, as opposed to being anti-nationalist, saying that, you know what, it doesn't really matter. My vote is not going to change the political spectrum. But 10,000 or 10 million votes are likely to change the political spectrum. Secondly, be and make change. Join demonstration. Run for office with that idealism. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. And in fact, in Gov, you're much more likely to lose because people don't care anymore. In our side, with the existence of nationalism, people will see that you bring the spirit of Indonesia, and you bring the spirit of our country and our flag, that you are able to make changes and whatsoever in our side. But lastly, give back to the state. Everyone in this debate in the final have enjoyed subsidies for state colleges, and I am even spending more money here at Penn. What I'm essentially saying is that a lot of people have benefited from the state as well. It is only right that you give back to the state in a way that your ancestors have died fighting for the independence. It's only right that you fight for the state in yourself. But that also also does not only mean work principally, i.e. also practically, that if you fight for the state, i.e. if you sacrifice things, for example, your opportunity and stuff like that, you're much more able to reform the state in the future. But secondly, humans have to believe that they can make change, and nationalism is that dream. We support hope as opposed to pessimism in politics. All arguments on minorities, and opening government argued, are predicated on them wanting to speak up to begin with. And absent the existence of nationalism or the dream that they can actually make changes within this debate, you're not likely to get any votes from them. But thirdly, I want to flip the entire thing and give you a clear portrayal of the counterfactual. Again, people will resort to the most proximate identity, but election and democratic system will still exist. You're much more likely to result into identity politics, because now it's no longer the debate about who can make better Indonesia, who can make better country, but who can relate with the most. And insofar as the majority will always win in their side, it's even worse, because if majority wins in both sides of the house, in our side you have a shared identity that you are going to be fighting for one another in the end. Same result, different premises. Closing.
How do you ensure the likelihood of check and balances when nationalism is the thing that overshadow people's objective perceptions towards the flow that towards the failure of government's failure and whatsoever and the of the house?
No. The first thing you want to weigh is the counterfactual, because in your side, you have no participation at all. But in our side, I think the rise of nationalism means that you're actively questioning whether this government is doing what they're saying in your citizen, in your PKN book, whether this government is actually caring about the minority, the way they promise in their like fucking campaign promises or whatever. So in our side, you have more incentive to want to check and balance to one another. Even if you have low capacity in both sides, in our side, you create significantly better change for the future. Lastly, what are the unique current issues that most developing countries face? First is the threat of neocolonialism, trade embargo, trade dependency. I think what the opening our government's argument about infrastructure and experts from the West are far less urgent, because the priority for these states ought to be to protect your individuals, to protect the citizen within the country who you signed a social contract for. Citizens give up their autonomy in order for them to get protection and welfare. Insofar as the state has to do that, then probably you have to prioritize the people within that in-group within the country. But secondly is the decreasing integration. This engages to Papua and rural area from opening government. The only way these people get help is when the majority know and acknowledge them as their siblings. Because as again, if the majority wins in both sides, at least in our side of the house, they have this drive to fight for these people to begin with, because we are fellow Indonesian. Even when you share no similarity, even when they're not practically and pragmatically beneficial to you, you should fight for your brothers. We're all in this fight together. Wait, where's my paper? Yeah, panels. Nationalism, admittedly, is not perfect the way this case and this speech is not. But we told you why this is essential. And for once and for one last time, I've never been prouder to oppose.
We thank the deputy leader of the opposition for that speech, and that wraps up the opening half of this grand finals. To start the closing half, we call upon the member for the government. Here.
Okay, hi, am I audible?
No, it's kind of echoey.
Oh, sorry. How about now?
I think because there's two of the devices in the same room, so you might want to disconnect the audio for one of them.
Okay, wait, yeah, like 30 seconds.
Okay.
All right, how about now? Is it clear and not echoing?
Yep, that's much better. You're both audible and visible.
All right. Okay. QI through chat. Please unmute yourself. I'll try to take one if I have time from opening. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. 2 points of setup to clarify the debate, right? First, I'm going to characterize to you what nationalism is actually about. And I think in opening debate, the mischaracterized most of the definition of nationalism, right? So 2 points here. First, I think nationalism is the belief that your nation's interests and stand should be prioritized and should be justified. This looks like Japanese people never admitting the war crime that they did in World War II and having their people paying respect to war criminals as a national heroes. But second, okay, I think it's also like a believe that is a more secluded or more narrow point of view, which is only limited to your nations and what happened in that nation. This look like ignoring exploitation that your state does to other states because you think it's benefiting your own countries and you don't care about what happened outside. Ignoring refugees because you know it's not benefiting your nation's economy. And I think this is the second characterization is important to this debate because it breaks the deadlock in opening bench. Because opening bench believe that the intention of nationalism is either good or evil, right? But with the second characterization is not necessarily that these individuals being evil or intentionally oppressive. It's just the ignorance that's being habituated by the narrative of nationalism or by the belief of nationalism. The second point I'll set up then, and I'm going to explain to you the counterfactual. Within a CG, with the decrease of nationalism, there are several things that exist in the status quo. First, I think with the decrease of nationalism, you can see that your countries can be wrong or could be wrong in the past, and it pushes more incentives for you to criticize them, for you to ask them to repair or to do reparations and whatnot. The second, in the status quo, the decrease of nationalism was followed by transnationalism. This is an important point of setup to note down because it also breaks the deadlocks in opening debate. It means the matrix that people use to judge whether a certain action or policy is not how it benefits or aligns with the interests of your own state, but it's also about how it benefits a human race in general. This looks like people are banning MNCs that exploit children in different continents, even when their products or their investment in that particular country is actually good. This answers the burden that being pushed by OO because we don't think the counterfactual is people being radical through like religions or something, right? I think it's the awareness of transnationalism. It's the awareness that regardless of your nation or regardless of your country, we are still one human race and we have to protect and stand for each other. This is something that we believe as CG, right? So, but okay, even though like radical beliefs exist, like what OO wants to argue in his debate, I think it happens on both sides of the house because those radical people are people who are very hard to change to begin with, and I think that's something that will still exist regardless of the decrease or the increase of nationalism. OO has never explained their burden, right? But last point I'll set up then, we think that with a last state-centrist view, it pushes interaction between people across continents with social movements relating to issues that happen all around the globe, right? This looks like people demonstrated against U.S. government for what happened in Palestine, or scrutinized U.S. politicians that's pro-Israel and whatnot. This is the counterfactual that exists in CG, credit CG, right? But what's our contribution then? I think as CG, we're going to explain to you why does the decrease of nationalism pushes more awareness for humanity, right? I think DPM mentioned about how minorities will be supported in government bench, and we agree to that, right? But never in OG did they explain how does this happen, how does the interaction looks like, and how the decision-making process actually gonna happen, right? CG will be glad to be the one to explain that. First, let's characterize how nationalism interacts in society, right? 3 points here. I think nationalism is biased. I think it's hard to believe OO's case regarding more accountability and whatnot, because it's hard to really tell the truth when you're expected to laugh and stand when you're expected to laugh your governments and what your governments are doing, right? This looks like people justifying what states did in '98 in Indonesia because they think that it's government trying to maintaining order. No incentive for them to try to know what actually happened or even supporting the victims and the family victims through Kamisan, for instance. Second, this is why 40 years ago, hundreds of people who died in Rwanda is being ignored by literally everyone, including UN. Right? This is because people doesn't care about what happened in other countries. People didn't care about what happened in Rwanda. And they just think of what's good for their own nations, right? But last point, this looks like UN or NGO that try to aid for humanitarian are being overpowered by the interest of nations that is justified by their people of what they are doing, or the cruelty that they're doing, or at best their ignorance towards what happened in other countries, right? What is the implication of this? 3 things. People are being ignorant for what happened outside their nation. People are being ignorant toward Uyghur people, for example, or poverty in general, for instance, right? But second, people justifying cruelty of what their nation did. This is like exploitative relations through economics, for instance, or through MNC, for instance. This is like invasions towards other countries or whatnot. Looks like debt trap, for instance, through like agreements and some or like asymmetric investment, right? But lastly, this look like people doesn't stand with the victim from the past because people doesn't care about Kamisan because they see it as a political cost to maintain order from the state, not something that people think supposed to be supported just because they're victims, because they believe that what state was doing back then is justified, right? But why the people is important, right? Three things here. First, people push the transnational movement where people or the society pushes how the awareness between people from different region or from different continents to give aids or to do demonstration or to just pushes for the governments to do something about what happened. They have the power to pushes nations across the globe, for instance, to do something about the problem, right? The second is boycotting actors, right? Including state or including company, even though it has nothing to do with their state, right? This is not how people now boycotting MACD, for instance, for what happened in Palestine, even though we have nothing to do with those people, right? But lastly, it changes the political climate, right? This is important because of two things, right? First, I think pushing politicians or governments to do better. This is like why humanitarian aid is bigger now than 20 years ago. This is why war on terror 20 years ago were being supported by the people, but not anymore in the status quo. This stops Biden or Obama or whoever it is to pull out because they know that the backlash is getting bigger for them to continue. The idea of national security is not viable anymore because it's at the expense of the life of other people in Middle East, for instance. This is like the intervention of millennials and youth inside politics. They change the maneuver of state. This is why diplomatic discourse are pushing more humanitarian aid and environmental issue and etc. And then the implication is important because it drives people to help people outside country. It drives society to help humanitarian as a one race, other than being segmented to one nation per se. We're so proud to propose. Thank you.
We thank the member for the government for that speech. A gentle reminder to accept POIs when offered. It will definitely help the engagement of this debate. So yeah, without further ado, we call upon the member for the opposition. Here.
Okay. POI-nya through unmuting yourself aja. By the way, yeah, I think a few small talk itu nggak apa-apa ya. One, I do think that it's going to be alive if I said people doubted me in this competition. I think it's more of a self-doubt, and I'm glad to be able to be here in grand finals despite all the doubt that I have to myself. And I hope that my speech gives justice to all the trust that all the friends around me have, including Hezron, Tere, Rain, Tata, Chacha, Justin, and everyone else in this room. So yeah, I hope that I live up to what people think about me. Also, very glad to finally be in the grand final room with the first grand final classics that Justin has. I'm happy to be here to experience this with him. And yeah, going to start in 3, 2, 1. This is a trend motion, a narrative motion. How the narrative of nationalism plays out and how an individual interacts with this ought to be the most important argument. Notice how opening plays under their own version of nationalism and summon magical impacts without explaining how nationalism inherently works and how an individual processes nationalism in itself. I'm going to explain this to you. How does nationalism look like? 3 things. A, the inherent correlation of internal fulfillment and happiness from a national identity. This looks like politicians asking you to buy Indonesian products, staying in Indonesia and working in Indonesia, because you working and staying in Indonesia brings you more proximate benefit. This is the textbook definition of nationalism, not what OG wants to tell you. Second, it uses a narrative that are more proximate to people. They explain to you about your ancestors who have bravely fought the Dutch. Your father and mothers were able to live in Indonesia and give birth to you. But thirdly, main goal is for you to derive happiness and fulfillment from a national identity, right? The narrative most likely is to cater to most people to be able to identify with this. It means that the manifestation on how the nationalism will probably look is something that is inherently enjoyable by an individual or inherently an individual could appreciate. So anything that it means that the nationalism is pressured is unclear in OG. 4 responses to OG. A, we don't operate under a vacuum where nationalism is defended by debaters. Notice how nationalism is an existing narrative used by governmental body. The most likely narrative in which nationalism is implemented is one that is digestible by the people, right? Government regrets people subscribing to nationalism, but the prerequisite for you to regret the subscription is people subscribing into it. Insofar, Gov characterized nationalism as something that is inherently bad. It means there is nothing to celebrate in Gov side because a characterization on what nationalism is what popular, but it is decreasing. It means that you cannot buy their whole definition if you want to buy their benefit. Second, sure, prioritization of national identity is probably true. But notice prioritization does not mean elimination of other identities. I am able to prioritize NOVED while still studying for UTS. Faulty, I know. But this means that an assumption that people are not able to access individual benefit because the prioritization of a national identity is simply untrue. But also this extends to the sudden elimination of basic human empathy in government side of the house. The fact that we are all fighting for Palestinians mean an individual has the capacity to empathize with other people regardless of a national identity. I do think that the empathy to other people is not a matter of national identity. It's a matter of basic human decency and empathy. Thirdly, nationalism is priority of national identity. Insofar prioritization means you hold value, I don't know how check and balance is reduced. The American identity pushes people to vote, to participate in politics, jury duty. Indonesia identity pushes people to nyalak, pushes people to criticize the current incumbent. Legit, the most nationalistic thing you see in your daily life is when you see a university student in Indonesia talking about the dying Indonesian identity while shouting to Jokowi. But notice that check and balances is not the biggest urgency in the debate. I'm going to explain to you why OO only prove to you check and balances. I'm going to prove to you the benefits that is prerequisite to check and balance and that results from check and balance, a direct vertical extension. Fourth, notice how discrimination is not a byproduct of nationalism. But let me mechanize this to you. Nationalism means you identify under one identity, but it also means everyone from Sabang until Merauke falls under the same umbrella of nationalism. It means it is an easier concept to fight for minorities because there is a shared identity. But let me flip this. My POI points this out, right? People are inherently very individualistic. Nationalism is a narrative that goes against this, which means that an individual tends to be more individualist without the existence of nationalism. Notice the backlash. They say that prioritization of common identity over personal identity is bad, but then they say they will be able to advocate for minorities. Unclear. They say that it is based on meritocracy and pragmatic benefits for the country, but you don't love your country. Unclear. You don't tie individual pragmatic benefits to the country. Notice the immense amount of backlash argument OG has, but notice the contextualization of nationalism as a narrative of community, which means the individual is rational enough to understand diversity, human empathy, and community is increased, which means that there will be less racist in our side of the house. Framing to kick out opening opposition. Notice how the whole idea of opposition is individual participation in politics is an inherent benefit. But Jose might be right. Political participation could be purely egalitarian, right? But notice the prerequisite of check and balance is the incentive of an individual to do so. If I explain to you on how individual experiences tangible benefit from the narrative, this means that this benefit is the a priori mechanism you need to access political participation and opening oppositions. That's what CO has for you. An explanation of the most certain and proximate benefit, but something that is more tied to nationalism, brain drain. Why nationalism provides you more net happiness and benefit? A, your happiness becomes more proximate. Notice how OO throws the burden of wanting OG to provide a counterfactual, but don't prove why the counterfactual is bad. We explain to you, you start to correlate aspects that are proximate to you as benefit. Your Indonesian food, your Indonesian family, and your Indonesian identity. It means happiness inherently becomes more proximate to people. It means that the existence of a narrative or regretting the decline of the popularity of the narrative means that access of happiness is something that is more proximate to you. Second, the comparative in Gov side is you do not tie these things that are more happy. You tend to think that external countries could give you more pragmatic benefit, but notice how these benefits are not proximate to you. Notice on how these stuff are less probable to be achieved, and even if so, bring you pragmatic benefit. It's like it's harder for you to get into a university outside. It's harder for you to gain benefit your friends outside compared to you getting benefit from the families around you, from Indonesian food, from Indonesian job, and from Indonesian university, which means that the narrative plays in where an individual is able to access more happiness, is where an individual is able to access more extent of benefits in our side of the house. I'll take the POI now.
You can still be proud with your national identity, but minus the superiority complex of nationalism. This is true because, as Jose explained, you have to be majoritarian to make it work. I already brought this in the first minute of my speech, Jose already referred it at the time again. You can still be
yeah, more than 15
empathetic
seconds. I get what you
still.
mean. I get what you mean. The problem is the moment when you say nationalism means that you have to be racist with other people. The moment when you say nationalism means an individual is not able to access the check and balance, means nationalism is not something that people will inherently buy, which means it's not popular to begin with. You need to play in the motion where nationalism is a popular thing that people subscribe to. Your definition does not operate under the fucking motion. Why brain drain is a good benefit? A, brain drain is the phenomenon which an individual feels that there is no longer any benefit from this nation and chooses to move outside. Notice how this provides exclusive harm to countries that we are talking about. India is experiencing brain drain. Poland is experiencing brain drain. Indonesia is experiencing brain drain. Why is this so? Because there is a decline in nationalism. Because individuals do not tie happiness and pragmatism to their country. Notice how brain drain is a very big issue out to be solved. Once you make sure your national identity is good or nationalism is good, you prevent brain drain. You prevent loss of labor. You increase general GDP and livelihood of country. B, this benefit is way more proximate than political participation. Judge, you can't say that you are 100% convinced that political participation is going to happen, and even if so, individual proximate happiness, prevention of brain drain, you know will happen. CEO provides you certainty. Ratu Opus.
We thank the member for the opposition for that speech. To continue, we call upon the government to appear here.
Can I get a minute to change my microphone and also set up my timer, please?
Sure.
Okay. Before starting my speech, just want to say thank you to my mom because she's watching me in my first Open Grand Finals, and especially in this classic competition NOVED. And also thank you for all the coaches and friends from EDSOE and everyone who invested in me. Yeah, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm just gonna directly engage with everything that has happened from CO, OO, and also OG, right? But let's just move towards CO first. I have specific rebuttals towards engagements towards CO. CO themselves, CO said that it's easier to fight for like minority and to fight for them because there is like nationalism as a form of similarity that incentivizes these people, right? But CO themselves agree that there is basic human decency access in status quo. So the question then becomes, under the side of the house, the benefit is not exclusive anyway, right? It's not exclusively happening from nationalism. But notice that CO never engages towards CG cases, that the reason why we celebrate nationalism is exactly because there is like a less state-centrist view where it pushes interactions of people across continents, for example, where this is actually the prerequisite, where people are able to differentiate what is justified and not justified, what is wrong and not wrong, exactly because we open up our perceptions, we open up our perspectives, not only not focusing on our state anymore, but also open up more holistic view, exactly because of this less state-centrist view, right? Exactly because of the decrease of nationalism. We think that in terms of like exclusivity, CO still wins in this debate, right? We don't understand all of these substantives regarding the brain drain arguments and how it will increase GDP and so on and so forth. This is a debate of insight, right? We are now as a government celebrating the decrease of nationalism exactly because nationalism has failed to give those kind of benefits that CO try to claim, right? We don't understand what is the process analysis onto why at the end of the day the benefit can still stand under the side of the house. But let's move to opening opposition, right? I think the engagements towards opening opposition will also hand in hand engage towards closing opposition. What OO told you? First, they accuse us of supporting government's failure and oppression towards people where societies no longer care about what's happening inside the country. We think the reason why I asked the POI towards OO is because the prerequisite for you to realize that something is wrong and is unjustified is to decrease your nationalism in itself, right? it's exactly the benefit of Sutra Substantive in regards exactly why we celebrate the decrease of nationalism, because people now are more open towards transnationalism. It changes the political climate where right now citizens can do comparative approach cross-border, for example. They're no longer overshadowed by the ignorance due to the rooted nationalisms that generationally happening under opposition side of the house, right? So they realize that this practice is corruptive, for example. This practice is not justified, for example, exactly because this practice is condemned in other countries, for example, right? Or in other perspectives outside of nationalism, for example, right? The reason why you realize political dynasty is not justified because you see what happened during French Revolution, for example, right? This kind of like perspectives will not exist under the side of the house when you like blindly supporting nationalism, because this kind of transnationalism that Sutra told to you is exactly the counter narrative of nationalism, exactly the prerogative of check and balances and all of the benefits that opposition try to claim, right? With nationalism, where you habituate ignorance, for example, and bias view towards the state, for example, this process analysis will not happen, right? Check and balance will not happen on the side of the house. People do value similarity and relatability, like what Justin said in OO, but it doesn't exclusively happen through nationalism, because it's going to be more harmful under the side of the house. Oh wait, it's under the side of the house, right? It's celebrated under our side of the house because people value similarity and relatability through the perspective of human rights, for example, through the holistic perspectives of transnationalism and so on and so forth, right? Exactly why we celebrate this kind of thing, and we don't think that we should not celebrate it when it does not cause harm under our side of the house, right? Simple logic that cannot be answered by opening opposition until causing opposition. Yes, Justin.
The problem with back half is a likelihood. CG to fail to prove why their counterfactual is more likely, and CO failed to prove why the extension is important to lead to do that in WIP. OO's argument of vulnerable actors and state accountability takes priority because it's not only mechanized but proven to be important. It is a long road, but we prove to you that it's worth the fight.
Okay, I think more engagement and also directly answering POI isn't here. Let's talk about OG because this will also answer questions from OO. I think the reason OG cannot win this debate is because the kind of setup and portrayal they are giving is really not charitable for this debate, making the debate not productive. Agree to CO. They never explain why suddenly nationalism creates xenophobia and Calvinism, and even if it creates that, what is the portrayal of the harm and why this is important? They never explain to you that process analysis assertion cannot make them win this debate. Moreover, if you notice, the kind of substantives coming from OG are all negative cases with no link back. Why then we should celebrate it under CG and also directly engage with with the question coming from opening opposition previously? What are the things that CG told you? CG told you that in the vacuum of nationalism, people are going by transnationalism, where they pay more attention to foreign affairs, for example, seeing what happens in the world more holistically, for example. Exactly why this is the process analysis that people being more transnationalist, meaning people are more aware about the things that currently happening all around the world that harm your conscience, for example. Right? This is why Sutra Setiara regarding how the implications of less state centers will give betterment to civilization, right? OG also talks to you that nationalism prolongs intergenerational defamation towards certain group. People are likely to be empathetic because of the decrease of nationalism, right? But we tell you that it's not exclusive under OG, because people's conscience exists, or people just simply not aware that of the problem, and that's why they're able to treat people in marginalized group with equity, for example. But what CG told you is much more exclusive and much more greater in benefit compared to any other pages, right? Nationalism in here is not specific in the context of Indonesia, but how this generates greater benefit, right? First, we no longer only care about our state. We care about Palestine the same way we care about Papua. So it's not as simple as Jawa caring about Papua, but moreover, people inside the country are incentivized to like care about other people, and other people outside of our country are incentivized to care about our country, exactly because the decrease of nationalism is happening all around the world. Two, the kind of better humanity where the magnitude of we care about certain causes is symmetrical, because nationalism no longer overshadow people's conscience, and people no longer create competitions between humanity cause, because we realize that the global world is fucked up, and the only way for us to survive is holistic relatability with transnationalism. Four, if you want to proliferate social movements, for example, you want to proliferate the help towards the marginalized group inside the country or outside the country, you need to celebrate the decrease of nationalism, exactly because those kind of proliferation needs transnationalism to exist to begin with, right? Five, because exactly why countries around the world help Indonesia during tsunami Aceh in 2004 or during COVID-19, because nationalism is decreasing, transnationalism awake incentives for society and countries to help and survive in this fuck up global world. It's kind of funny that opening government only talk about nationalism makes countries to push to only talk about nationalism like that. Right? We think that all of the proselytizers and benefit is already claimed by CG. We're very proud to propose.
We thank the government for that speech. Last but definitely not the least, we call upon the opposition work. Here.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yep, you are both.
I know this is my last speech here, so probably you guys are pretty tired, but you know, 4 things I just want to say before I start my speech. I'm happy I'm not opening government in a green competition of open grand finals. Second, I love Kevin. I am forever grateful for him. Number 3 is I love ADS. As you can see, these are the people that made me become here, and they are the reason as to why I keep debating. But lastly, I will go to church after this. Happy Sunday, everyone. And I'll give thanks to God because Kevin will not tweet depressive thoughts tonight. I'm happy for the fact that he said. Pronouns are she, her. Starting. And 3, 2, 1. I think the debate in opening is an unproductive debate about worst case scenario being true or not because OG flags such scenarios it is untrue of nationalism. But second of all, I want to break the deadlock that exists in debate. And this is an exclusive contribution from closing opposition. Nationalism is never about satisfaction, but it is about loving your country as an average reasonable person. This is why we value the fight of our ancestors, Soekarno or whatever. We do ceremonies of August 17 as an Indonesian. We name streets after heroes and whatnot. So these are all forms of you paying respect that is totally viable and does not hamper yourself. So CG's putting your country interest first automatically fails, and OG's case of jihad should not be counted. But notice how opening opposition's main benefit is check and balances, but without explaining why the national identity pushes people to participate in check and balances, it does not work. We explained to you that we have an incentive to give back to the country when you feel tangible benefit of nationalism, when happiness is more proximate from you. This means that the prerequisite for opening opposition are people to participate in politics. The analysis of closing opposition completes your analysis. Therefore, we think that CO should be on top of opening opposition. This is a distinction. Judges, please penalize CO from knifing. I'll talk about 3 things. Number 1 is opening government. Second is closing government. Last, I'm going to just weigh CO for opening opposition. On opening government, their case talks about how nationalism in status quo is blind nationalism, and then you further hate other nations, you go to war, and this is why you justify threatening any other nations. I want to posit that OG is very worst case scenario and cherry pick scenarios, because nationalism does not equal into sacrificing yourself as the bare minimum or you feeling superior. I think that is racism, so those are 2 different aspects. But I want to flag out that nationalism goes hand in hand with narrative that promotes tolerance and communality. So, for example, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika in Indonesia or Ubuntu in South Africa. These are narratives that actively talks about you, tolerating your surrounding, to treat them with love, with respect, just like how you would like to be respected. So it is untrue what Brian Jose said, even if you choose 20 examples of Indonesia government being bad. All of these are not because of nationalism, but it is because greed of certain people that I don't want to mention, that have clashing political interests and cares more about individuality and not nationalism. But even if you do not buy all of these reasonings, panels and judges, the outcome in opening government is a far worse vote compared to opposition. Because having no nationalism means you have less humanity, therefore all of the issues about minorities could not be fixed because there is no incentive to fix your country because you don't love them because of no nationalism. Secondly, let's talk about how people who is nationalistic is a barrier for progressivity. Number 1, untrue. I want to flag that opening government never told you what a good progressivity is and what it should look like. We think that in status quo, the entrance of feminism, for example, or even gay community exists even in countries like India or Indonesia. So OG needs to touch some grass. It is not perfect, sure, but progress of progressivity exists. But second of all, notice that opening government is selling that they want people to be actively be an enemy to government to make sure that equality exists and check and balances exist. Panel, it is one thing to question the government. But to make changes, you need nationalism. You need the feeling of love and respect of your ancestors and people who fought for the If you want to buy Jose's extension of defending people in Papua, you also need to buy CO's analysis of how people incentive to help, donate, and fight is from nationalism. What is the weighing here? Number 1, OG falls under one singular scenario and is not charitable at all. CO can answer, even if we do somewhat become nationalistic a bit more than we're supposed to be, that is still all right, and that is still a benefit in itself. But second, the prerequisite exists in closing opposition. Being skeptical exists irrespective of this motion happening or not. But making changes needs nationalism. Their case needs our analysis to run. The comparative is that in their side of the house, people do not participate and people does not care at all. This means that people don't care shit and does not actively correct the government. So you have less check and balances, right? So things like government domination happens in their side of the house, and helping voicing out minorities does not exist in opening government. It exists in closing opposition. Let's go to closing government. Number one, the POI talks about how people's nationalism blurs their objective view of the country. Number one, I want to deposit that nationalism is about loving your country, not about loving a political actor. These are two different things and two different causes, which I think CG could not be credited from. But second, people's rationality could never be blurred by nationalism, because you are the people that actively gets the impact of those bills, of regulations, and leaders. What they're doing so far is going to affect you in the future, or maybe your grandchildren in the next 50 years. Your family, your children, your parents, your friends. So you're going to care objectively about what happens, even if you love your country, right? But second of all, you said about how people does not care about Uyghur, what happens outside of your country, and you became way more careless and you have no humanity. Number one, I think Kevin has flagged that we have basic humanity as a person and as an average reasonable person. But second of all, more importantly, judges. Nationalism is the cause of you understanding why the sadness of Palestinians or the people of Hong Kong protesting against China happens. When you refuse and reject the fact that people can love their country and do have some attachment into it, you cannot understand why people in Hong Kong stops going to school in order to fight for the right against China. Therefore, things like donations, helping them, retweeting about them on Twitter, do not exist because CG does not care about that. What is the weighing here? Number one, CG's carbon copy case from OG should have fallen from Kevin since the start, because I think it has the same premise, just different execution. But number two, CG could not achieve their own benefit they want to champion. Case of racism does not happen because that's a racism 50 years ago, or maybe that's nationalism 50 years ago. This is a trend motion, so please play on status quo. The nationalism that happens in status quo right now is a nationalism that actively embraces everyone, irrespective of your color, races, religion, or whatever you do or your view. But third of all, French nationalism is not the counterfactual of nationalism, right? But exactly, you are only able to care about other nations insofar you have solved issues in your country. We propose to you that the prerequisite of French nationalism is nationalism. You are only able to care about other people's well-beings, about other countries, once you have fulfilled this in your own country, completely flipping CG's benefit. Therefore, CO should be on top of closing government. Lastly, I'm going to wait why CO is need to be on top of opening opposition. I'm honored to be on Justin closing, but I want you to note these panels. Number one, unification is important, but in Silver OO's case could not give a direct impact to society like what CO does. CO should be way better. CO's brain drain case is the most important thing in this debate, because it is not only about proximity, but it is about lives of millions of people in developing countries, which is vulnerable, which is unrealistic and urgent. We need all of those brains. The comparative is that they're going to go outside of other country. That is worse. But second, happiness is a benefit that exists in closing opposition. This should be round winning, because this is a diverse happiness gained from diversity that exists from nationalism. And with this last page, I'll never propose.
With that, that marks the end of NOVED 2023.